The air cooler market has actually gotten really exciting recently, and Deepcool and Thermalright have been pushing for a lot of that. We've reviewed coolers from both of them in the recent past. Deepcool we had some issues with a few years ago, like when we had to cut one of their heat pipes open to prove the marketing BS was in fact BS and not reality. But they've been on a roll lately with some better stuff. So this is the AK620. We already reviewed it. $60-ish cooler, and it was fairly competitive. The Vetroo V5 set off all of this for budget cooler comparisons because it got a ton of momentum at a $30 to $35 price point. Now we're back looking at the AK400. This is also a Deepcool cooler, and it's a single tower design, a 120mm fan, one of them. And in this benchmark and review suite today, we're gonna be looking at thermals, pressure testing, and flatness of the cold plate alongside other scientific metrics we've taken for the cooler's performance versus these among many others in our charts. Before that, this video is brought to you by Lee's O11D Evo case. The O11D Evo is a mid-tower that tested well previously with us and is most interesting for attention to fine details and its unique features. One of those is the easy-to-use invertible layout. The O11D Evo inversion process is the easiest we've ever worked with on a case, allowing it to flip entirely for a unique upside-down build or work as a standard layout. The O11D Evo has 2 chambers for the system and the power supply, support for up to 9 storage drives, and edge-to-edge glass for a showcase, while still offering excellent airflow through side and bottom intakes. Learn more at the link in the description below. So I just got some breaking news as we started filming this that the Assassin Spirit has vanished from Amazon, which is very unfortunate because we did a lot of our comparisons in this video talking about this one. So this cooler not as relevant as it was about 24 hours ago now. Things change fast in this industry. Unfortunately, it looks like Thermalright has co-opted its own listing for the Assassin Spirit and redirected it to something it's calling the Assassin King, which is more expensive. Anyway, we're gonna focus on the Deepcool AK400, so it doesn't matter too much. But this one, it's a $35 cooler. It seems to be about the standard price these days for an air cooler. There are some in the $20 range. We've looked at a few, but this is about where the price point is for brands that have some kind of name recognition and then maybe a good warranty policy or something like that. And of course, there's more to a cooler than just the thermal performance because you're looking at noise, so acoustics, the type of noise, the volume of it, of course, the efficiency, so performance at a given noise level, and then things like the warranty and like the ongoing support. Do you get extra brackets as new sockets come out? When AM5 comes out, will they give you another bracket? And you just have to look at company history for that. So for this comparison, this cooler, the AK400, there's 2 versions of them. There is white, which is obviously right here, and the standard color version. And these have no other differences besides that. So that's all you have to think about. Between the two, they support all current socket types, LGA 1700 and AM4. Obviously no AM5 support, but AM4 is supported on AM5, so it'll be fine. And one of the things we really want you to pay attention to as we go through the charts is that the difference between something like this, the AK400, and this one, the Arctic Freezer 34 Esports Duo, which actually did really well in our testing previously, the differences between them will become much more apparent as the heat load increases. So when we go from 68 watts up to 123 watts, that's when you'll see these pull apart a little more, where at 68 watts, they look kind of all the same. It's just because there's not enough heat really. And we've got stuff out on the table too, like there's this older Noctua cooler, so this is an NHU 14S. We've tested the NHU 12S Redux recently. There's the AK620 here. If you just want sort of a comparison for size of how these match up, this one's sitting on top of plastic. And this is the Fuma 2, which is probably the most relevant cooler currently to really pay attention to. It's more expensive than the AK400, but this is the best acoustics to thermals sort of ratio we've looked at really any time recently other than liquid coolers that are large. So this is a key one to pay attention to in the charts if you can stretch the budget a little more. But at $35, sort of this lineup right here will be a main focus, and the one that's no longer available, unfortunately. Heat pipes so good that they oppose gravity. Let's see if they work. Nope. So time to look at the cooler closer. First of all, it is a separable fan as always. It's got clips on it that you can use extras of to attach another fan if you want to buy a second one. It's a standard aluminum fin stack here. There is a copper cold plate. The heat pipes end up being a direct contact style instead of a cold plate that wraps around them all and encompasses them. So direct contact for heat pipe. The naming, so AK400, as far as I can tell, is an indicator of how many heat pipes it has, because if you look at the AK600, or 620 rather, it does end up having 6 heat pipes. So that seems to be the naming nomenclature here from Deepcool is heat pipe count in the hundreds. I mean, not hundreds of heat pipes, but the 4 and the 6 is the hundreds unit. Anyway, moving on. For the actual fin stack, they're still doing this sort of interesting checkered pattern that I'm sure in marketing they would argue has some thermal benefit or acoustic benefit or whatever. Realistically, there's no way to actually prove that. You could maybe simulate in software and get kind of something, but for all intents and purposes, this is just for looks. It's kind of interesting. The top has this extra plastic cap. If you remove this, it gives you an extra maybe 2 to 3 millimeters of clearance. And the only reason it's not more, because it's clearly thicker than 3 millimeters, is because the heat pipes stick up and get encapsulated by the plastic. We've done testing in the past on the 620 with this on versus off for both of the towers. It did not have a meaningful impact on thermals, even though it's sort of capping the top of the heat pipe where you have some natural heat rise coming off of it. So not a big deal there, and it's really, the looks are not outweighing the thermal performance. So that's good. That's what we want to see. If you look at the fan at a glancing angle here, you'll see that it's a little bit concave, so it goes in towards the hub with the blade design and a little bit actually on the outer edge. This is another one of the small fan design features where, you know, we'll see how it does in thermal testing, but it's just a deviation they've done from how some of the other vendors design their fans. The edges here have these blocks of rubber that are wrapped around the plastic border. You'll see these on most fans. So for example, let's grab like a Noctua one. Standard Noctua approach is to do these rubber edges that you can replace for different color variants. And that is so that at the point of contact, where you can clearly see the plastic housing for the fan does not contact the heatsink, but the rubber part does. That's just to absorb vibration and reduce the noise that would be sort of rattling as a result of that vibration. So Deepcool is doing some of that here. It's fairly standard. You see right here, also on the Scythe Fuma 2, they do it. Thermalright does it on the Assassin Spirit. That basically doesn't exist now. And so it's not special, but it is expected, and they've done that. For the fan type, this is a new fan from Deepcool. This is the FC120P. It's a 0.13 amp fan, standard 12 volts. Spins up to about 1850 RPM max. If we take one of the AK620 fans here, these were a different model. These from the AK620, they're the well-known FUK120 fans. I'm being reminded off camera that it's actually letter, but it's the FK120. Sorry, my confusion there. So the FUK120s are the old ones, and then the FC120P is what's on the AK400. Bit of a difference in RPM, but you'll see in the charts how they line up thermally. So let's do some measurements on this. The cooler is about 120 millimeters wide, as you'd expect, because it has a 120 mil fan. For height from the actual bottom edge of the cold plate, okay, well this doesn't quite reach, but we measured it with another device earlier that does reach, and it's 155 millimeters. So you may run into some clearance issues on mid towers that cap at 150 a lot of the time, but 155 is your height you'll have to clear. Again, you can take that off for a couple millimeters, but you're really stretching if you have to do that. And honestly, you're throwing away part of the actual value of their version of this heatsink anyway, because you could buy a capless one for cheaper from almost anyone. For width, for clearance here, you're not going to be in the keep out zone of basically any motherboard I can think of right now for RAM. So you're good. You're far away from the memory socket. You won't have to really raise or lower this. Maybe certain mini ITX configurations, but if you look at the depth of the actual mounting screw versus the fan, it's not much different. So you should be good here. Packaging on these is very simple. It ships in this box, pretty standard stuff. Internally, they've got a foam block on the bottom with a plastic protector sheet for the cold plate, which is again direct contact heat pipes. And then they have another one of these foam blocks. So they haven't gone overkill with a ton of plastic and waste, and they also haven't really skimped on it too much. Mounting hardware looks like this. We're going to talk about the installation in a second. And as you can see, it comes with some spare fan clips. So if you want to add another fan, we'll show you what the numbers are on that. It's not super worth it, but you could do it with their included clips. The hardware includes these 4 bits. All of the screws and hardware are included in reusable plastic bags, so we like to see that. It's less waste overall instead of a bunch of single-use plastic. Of course, that's provided you have a reuse purpose for it. And it does come with a physical manual as well as, of course, the online option. So this is kind of what the kit looks like. Let's quickly look at installation. And the installation uses the stock AM4 backplate, after which the 4 included standoffs are placed over the backplate's own standoffs. Next, the Deepcool bracket gets screwed into the backplate through the standoffs, and this utilizes the central 4 out of 8 total holes in that bracket, which is designed universally for use on AMD and Intel. For AMD, the more center of mass screws shift some of the force further inward, and it reflects a little bit in the pressure testing momentarily, and also in the wiggle factor, is the scientific word for the cooler moving around. At this point, 2 cap screws and a mounting plate below the tower get threaded into the screws on the universal bracket, and you're pretty much done. Intel installation is almost the same, except it uses an included Intel backplate and the retaining screws move to the outer holes instead. The system is easy enough, and we don't really have too many complaints here from an ease of installation perspective, but we did find that it's a little more difficult to restrict the cooler side-to-side movement when fully mounted than on some competing product designs. This can be compensated for. It's just something you need to be aware of. Deepcool's mounting hardware and retention kit are probably among the overall poorest aspects of an otherwise competitive product in the AK400, and that's something we can show on our first test. And here comes that first test. It's the cold plate pressure scan. This test uses chemically reactive materials and a special NIST traceable scanner to measure the distribution of pressure across the CPU's IHS. This test evaluates the design of the cold plate and the mounting system, but mostly the mounting system, and how effectively they work together to hold the cold plate to the IHS. The test was made possible through all of our supporters at Patreon at patreon.com/gamersnexus, and by those who buy our products on store.gamersnexus.net, like our toolkits, our mouse mats, shirts, our mod mats especially for PC building and teardowns of components, and other items on the GN store. So thanks to all of you for making what we do possible. The AK400 mounted to our 3800X shows weak pressure centrally overall and clear outlines for the heat pipes. Contact around the outer edge is good, but most of the heat generation will be dead center. Thermal paste will help fill this gap, and low pressure doesn't necessarily mean no contact, but there is performance left on the table here. The 3950X mount shows mostly the same. It's lacking pressure centrally and along the edge nearest the I/O, but we'll need thermal tests for more. Our surface flatness testing is next. This uses even more specialized testing equipment in our test lab, and it tests the actual consistency of the cold plate surface as it mates with the IHS. This bonds well with the pressure testing we do to form a full picture of the contact quality. The AK400 has poorly distributed pressure, as we saw before, which is a result of its somewhat wobbly mounting hardware. The flatness is good though. It's about the same as everything else on this chart, and it doesn't encounter the massive outliers we saw with the Assassin Spirit or the Freezer 34 Duo, which exceed the bounds of this chart. This helps to make up for lacking central pressure on the AK400, and flatness is especially important when the heat pipes are directly exposed like these are. You need those heat pipes to make good contact with the IHS, otherwise you just don't have good cooling potential. And these two images alone, the pressure map and this chart, are what make our cooler reviews some of the best ones on the internet, because you get the full picture of what really constitutes the thermal performance that we're going to look at now. Starting off our performance test, we're taking a look at a 68 watt heat load with each cooler set to a normalized noise level of 35 dBA. We explained this in our in-depth testing methodology piece previously, but this test is designed to evaluate the efficiency of each cooler and provide an even playing field by using a consistent noise level. So we're controlling for noise and disallowing brute force, but we'll look at max cooling performance and fan speed next. This heat load is representative of R5, i3, and i5 CPUs, and as a reminder, each cooler uses its included fans for all of our tests here. Here's the chart. At 35 dBA, the AK400 runs the CPU at 39 degrees Celsius over ambient. This places it within error of the Arctic Freezer 34 Esports Duo. It's also within error of the Noctua NH-U12S Redux and the Thermalright Assassin Spirit that we reviewed fairly highly for its price. For context, the NH-U12S Redux and the Freezer 34 are both about $15 more than the AK400 at the time of filming. Following closely behind, the Vetroo V5 is 2 degrees warmer than the AK400 in this test, while being the same price, but that'll get worse, the gap that is, as we increase the heat load. Overall, the AK400 performs within margin of error of the top performing coolers in our data set for this limited set of data on the 3600. We only look at the low-end coolers here because it's not much heat. And ignoring all other factors like dimensions, ease of installation, and warranty, each of these provides about the same result. It's worth noting, though, that the AK400's fan is already at 80% here, so there's not much room for it to ramp up in the upcoming tests. The next test is the same low heat load, but with each cooler's fans set to 100%. This test enables coolers with more powerful, or just simply more, fans to pull ahead of other coolers, although they often do so at the cost of noise. It's no longer fully controlled, and instead is fully unleashed. At 100% fan speed, the AK400 comes in at 38 degrees Celsius over ambient at 39 dBA when measured with our standardized noise testing practices. Once again, this places it within margin of error of the NHE12S Redux and the Spirit 120, each of which is within range of inaudible differences. The Freezer 34 is technically ahead here, but it's also at 42 dBA, so that makes sense. And 3 dBA is about when people start to notice the volume increase. Compared to the same priced Vetroo V5, the AK400 is 2 degrees cooler and 4 dBA quieter, a clear winner, showing some inefficiencies of the V5. All of this places the AK400 among the best coolers we've tested for both performance and acoustics with a 68 watt heat load. The Fuma 2 remains the overall victor here, and by an impressive margin. It's just you pay extra for that. Our next benchmark is a 123 watt heat load, representative of something like an AMD R7, an Intel i5, and some post-Tau Intel i7 or AMD R9 CPUs. We'll start this one noise-normalized, but we have 100% numbers next, including the AK400 with 2 fans. Here's the chart. With a 123 watt heat load at 35 dBA, the AK400 runs 59 degrees Celsius over ambient. With this load, it's still within margin of error of the Noctua NHE12S Redux and the Thermalright Spirit 120. However, now that we're running hotter than the R5 previously, the Freezer 34 Duo is able to pull ahead and is 2 degrees cooler than the AK400, and that distance will widen soon. This allows Arctic an advantage as an option just from a pure cooling perspective. The gap between the Vetroo V5 and the AK400 has also grown. The AK400 is now 4 degrees cooler in this test than the V5, and that's far better at this point. 4 degrees makes a lot of difference when you're running warm like this, especially in a case where the ambient is higher. 123 watts is slightly more than we typically recommend for a mid-budget cooler like the AK400, but it's actually serviceable here, and it even leaves a little bit of room for overclocking or just lowering the fan speed. Now, each cooler's fans are set to 100% speed. In this benchmark, the Deepcool AK400 runs 58 degrees Celsius over ambient. It's barely moved because we were near the max fan speed already, meaning the AK400 has more limited headroom at the top end of performance to compensate for higher heat. For some context, 20 to 22 degrees Celsius is the room temperature for all of our tests, so it'd be about 80 degrees when you factor that in with ambient and the CPU temperature together. It's warm, but it's not TJ Maxx, it's not immediately problematic. With 2 fans, the AK400 ran at 55.5 degrees, so about 2 degrees of improvement, but also a louder noise level. In comparison to other coolers, this puts the AK400 within error of the NHE12S Redux and the Spirit 120. Once again, the gap between the Freezer 34 Duo and the AK400 has grown, with the 34 Duo now almost 4 degrees cooler. Considering the Noctua NHE12S is $15 more than the AK400 and the Thermalright Assassin Spirit 120 is $6 less than the AK400, this places it in a good position for both thermal and acoustic performance compared to similarly priced coolers. Wrapping this one up is pretty easy. So the biggest competitors here to consider, first of all, just the AK400 standalone is fine, at the least. And we're sort of okay with saying, yeah, this makes sense at $35. It's not really that impressive to us. It's just kind of standard. That's not a bad thing. It's certainly a much better result than us saying, this is terrible, don't buy it. And we've said that a lot. In fact, that is probably most of what I've said for the last 14 years I've been doing this. So it's at least in the fine camp, which is a very exclusive group of products lately. The ones to look at would be the Arctic Freezer 34 Esports Duo, and to the extent that you can find it, maybe your region will be better, who knows, maybe their inventory will update by the time we post this video. The Assassin Spirit from Thermalright would also be worth looking at. Now, between these, where you end up with is this cooler is about $15 more than this one at the time of filming this, and thermally, that has these about equal, but the Arctic option costs more. It has an extra fan. Fan's not doing a whole lot though. So where these two start to deviate then is the heat load going up, where this one, when we're at 68 watts, which is about an R5 and i5 non-K CPU, stuff like that, they're functionally the same. There's really no meaningful difference. And once you go up to 123 watts and plus, so you're in R7 territory, your post-tau expiry Intel i5 K SKU territory, some i7s, when you're in that range, the gap between these widens and it favors the Arctic Freezer 34 Duo. It's a couple degrees, like 4 sort of at the high end. That can start to matter, but it's really going to depend on the CPU you're using. This is not necessarily a cooler we'd really recommend for that 120 watt range, but it is capable, and as long as you're using a case that doesn't suffocate the cooler's access to air, you'll be fine, unless you start overclocking and things like that. For the Spirit, so where this one comes in is really pretty simple. It is a cheap tower cooler. It's cheaper than this AK400 when you can find it, but again, it's vanished. We've seen the price change multiple times. So just when we were writing the review for the Spirit, it went from $21 to $30-something, and it was all prices in between in that 1 or so week period. It's all over the place. Part of the reason for that pricing difference is lack of LGA 1700 support natively. They would ship you a bracket if you bought it, but it did not include it, and I think that's probably why the pricing was so low for the Spirit when it was low. So these would be the two to sort of consider. Deepcool includes all brackets that are currently relevant, sockets that exist today with the AK400, so does Arctic. And then if you want to go higher end, the Fuma 2 is still a great option for air cooling. Liquid cooling, of course, has its own advantages, but you're basically doubling the price at that point. So this would be the one we'd say to look at if you are really concerned about acoustics, noise level, type of noise. It is far and away the most thermally efficient cooler we've tested, where you can bring the noise level down and still get a good thermal result, and far quieter than you would get for the same thermals on a single tower or single fan like this one. So that's how the stack lines up. AK400 overall, pretty good for Deepcool, and it is competitive with the other stuff here on the table. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, if you want to support this type of in-depth testing, go to store.gamersnexus.net and grab one of our coaster packs, our mouse mats that are desk-sized. We have red and black and blue and black with a high-resolution print, custom rubber undersides, and custom border stitching color. Or you can grab something like a mod mat for PC building and electronics teardown. Subscribe for more as always, and thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.